When detailing the history of hard-boiled detective fiction in her book Keen Concepts in Crime Fiction, Heather Worthington initially explores the roots of the genre as American short detective stories in pulp magazines and later novels of the 1920s and 30s, which both heavily reflected and criticized the contemporary American events of the Great Depression and the Prohibition. These pulp magazines, most notably the magazine Black Mask, featured a tough, street-smart male protagonist, usually a private detective, who would solve crimes whilst facing off against gangsters, femme fatales, and corruption within the police force. The magazines were originally targeted towards a blue-collar or working-class male audience. This is reflected by the text's misogynistic and often homophobic views towards female and homosexual characters. Raymond Chandler's 1939 novel, The Big Sleep, fits into this era of crime fiction. However, towards the end of her analysis of hard-boiled crime fiction, Worthington delves into how the subgenre evolved due to criticisms of the social inequality depicted in earlier hard-boiled crime novels. Here she notes how feminist writers in the early 1980s, such as Sarah Paretsky, took the more masculine format of the conventional detective novels and feminized them with female protagonists and detectives with more emotional responses to their cases and more attachment to the people they meet along the way. These features are present in Paretsky's V.R. Warshawski novels, as well as Dorothy Porter's novel The Monkey's Mask. Nevertheless, while Worthington does highlight the key changes and adaptations within the genre, such as the addition of more emotionally in tune protagonists and prominent references to feminist and liberal politics, she also emphasizes that the key features of a hard-boiled crime novel are still evident in modern crime fiction, such as the tough private investigator, the grimy urban setting infested with crime, a femme fatale, and morally ambiguous supporting characters. I shall explore the core elements of the hard-boiled iconography, which are apparent by comparing the classic The Big Sleep with the more revisionist The Monkey's Mask. In The Big Sleep, we follow a tough and witty private detective called Philip Marlowe as he attempts to solve a blackmailing case for oil tycoon General Sternwood. As the case evolves, Marlowe eventually gets caught up in trying to solve several murders and a missing persons case whilst crossing paths with gangster Eddie Mars and pornographer Arthur Geiger. In The Monkey's Mask, an ex-cop and current private detective, Jill Fitzpatrick, is tasked with finding a missing university student, Mickey Norris, by her parents. Through investigating her university and studying her amateur poetry, Fitzpatrick crosses paths with two acclaimed poets in the Sydney poetry scene, as well as developing a sexual relationship with Mickey's professor, Diana. The similarities. Both novels feature hardened private detectives who are often both laconic and quite witty when they do speak, with Marlowe using phrases such as, "I didn't mean to be," when questioned about being too tall, and Fitzpatrick using phrases such as "taste" to point out Mickey's poor taste in poetry and belittle the wife of a poet whose poetry the victim was fond of. Both stories start with one crime or case that leads to another case. In The Big Sleep, simple blackmail leads to the murders of 4 men, pornography racketeering, and a temporary kidnapping of the protagonist, Marlowe. In The Monkey's Mask, the missing persons case unfolds into a murder case when the missing person, Mickey Norris, turns up dead. Furthermore, both texts take place in a grimy urban landscape rife with sin and vice. In Chandler's Los Angeles, the city is run by organized crime, pornography rackets are enabled by police, and murders are covered up by gangsters and the wealthy elite. In Porter's Sydney, the poetry scene is run rampant with sexual deviancy, including adultery, possible pedophilia, and erotic asphyxiation. Lastly, and most importantly, both stories have open endings in which there is no closure experienced by either the capture or killing of the antagonists. Instead, in The Big Sleep, Carmen Sternwood is allowed to seek medical help instead of going to prison for her murder of Rusty Reagan. And in The Monkey's Mask, Nick, the husband of Mickey's professor Diana, is able to live free of any consequences after being implied as Mickey's killer, but never proven to be. The differences. The main stylistic differences are that The Big Sleep is written in novel form, whilst The Monkey's Mask is written as a verse novel in poetry form rather than in prose. There is also the obvious difference of the two protagonists being different genders. And lastly, there's the fact that while Philip Marlowe remains indifferent to sexual advances from both Carmen and Vivian, Jill Fitzpatrick gives in to her primal desires and engages in a fully sexual and emotional extramarital relationship with Diana.